Hey, good evening. I'm Audra, and this is Coming in Hot, where my guest and myself talk mostly about mindset theories and real practical ways that you can improve your lifestyle, your relationships, your health, and yourself. So now that I've raced through all that, I think I said it in like 2 seconds. So anyway, I wanted to welcome everybody. And tonight I'm talking to Mr. Mike Moulton, who I have known for, we're thinking 20 or so years. So something or another like that. And he is a father of 5, 4 girls. I'm sure that's fun. 4 girls. Right? Deep breath. 4 girls, 1 boy. And just interesting little fact. He taught me how to play tennis back in the day when I was about 13 or 14. So we have some fond memories from back in the day.
Long time ago.
Right. So tonight we're going to talk about the stigma of addiction. And Mike has a passion for advocacy and wants to help change the stigma and maybe help everybody understand addiction a little bit better and the way the brain works and all kinds of, we're going to have so much information to give you. So I'm excited to just dive in, to be honest. Yeah. But that being said, so my goodness, so what has happened since the last time, we saw each other? Because I moved off and then you got married and all kinds of things have happened.
Oh, yeah. I've was in the restaurant business. So, being in the restaurant business, they move you all over. So I think I left Mount Pleasant and then went to Houston. I was in Joe's Crab Shack, Freaky Houston for quite a while. Bar manager down there and everything. And from there, they Cracker Barrel moved me to Arkansas, to Hot Springs on the border in Hot Springs, and then Johnny Carino's in Texarkana. Then in 2005, I ended up with Toyota here in Texarkana. I've been there since. So. Oh wow! Yeah, just well traveled.
We have more in common than I actually knew because I lived in Hot Springs. We'll have to go back and check time frames. But yes, my ex-husband, his duty station was in Hot Springs. He was a Navy recruiter there for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I was there from, I guess, 2001 to 2003. Almost 2000.
Yeah, you would have been. I bet I came right as you were leaving then because my son was born in 2003 in Washington, and we came. Arkansas was a couple of years after that. Yeah, we went to Virginia after that. We were all over the place. So, but anyway, so we're talking about addiction tonight and this and that. And I know that we've kind of talked about a little bit about this off camera. Catching up on what's happened since then. And can you tell me a little bit about where all of this comes from for you, where your passion, your advocacy comes from for this?
Absolutely. Well, first, I am an alcoholic in recovery. Been to treatment. Of course, like most alcoholics or drug addicts or anything like that. There was years and years to where I really wasn't an alcoholic. If you ask me, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not, I do it on my own time. I have a full-time job. I make good money. I pay all my bills. This is just something that I do for me time. So, I think a lot of people that are addicts, the whole denial stage is probably the longest stage. And I think that we all know or are affected by somebody who is an addict, of some sorts. And, first and foremost, I want to let people know that, when you're an addict, it doesn't necessarily mean drugs or alcohol. There's shopping. That's a really deal. Something that's growing on a daily basis in this country that we really need to look out is also eating disorders.
Absolutely.
That's we are already the number 1 obese country in the entire world, which is, right now this COVID-19 thing's going on. So we're getting a lot of attention because people in lockdown and, stay at home orders, obesity is becoming a big issue. And, high blood pressure, heart issues. And, you see a lot of people dying from that could stem from that. So, Yeah, to touch what you were saying, advocacy is really what I'm after. I do have a passion for it. I've been through, I'm on my third marriage. The first two marriages, I was an alcoholic. Of course, during those marriages, again, I wasn't. So,
right.
I had excuses for everything. But that's a whole nother story, a whole nother show.
Right. I'm telling you.
Married to an addict, we can really talk about that.
Yeah, we will have to. Yeah, because we'll get into where I'm at also with all that kind of stuff myself. But we both kind of talked about, and I hadn't mentioned to you, but if we want to go back, there's a family history, we discussed between us. And that's something that I know on my end, I was aware that there was an issue on my father's side of the family with alcoholism. I'd been made aware of that when I was a child. There was no alcohol in the house. We were never exposed to it. We're never around it. And so I grew up basically just not, like I said, not being around it. It wasn't until I was much older that my parents ever started drinking a little bit, and it was here and there. The most we had was we had a bottle of Crown that sat up in the cabinet up above the stove, that perfect little cabinet for hot toddies. So, but my dad had been through his own struggle when he was younger and had first married my mom. And so he had set it aside. And so I never saw it. I just knew that it existed on both sides of the family. So, what about you? What is your experience? I guess your family history with it.
Well, you just like you, when I was younger, I had heard stories. We had heard stories of our grandparents when they were younger, having some marital issues, not really knowing why, because we knew them as the most loving people ever. Best grandparents and all this, and and it wasn't until I was much older, much older, that I had found out that alcohol was the reasoning for when they were young in their marriage that they had. So my grandmother, who honestly is probably or was the most loving woman in the entire world, and I know we can all say that about that, but she was an alcoholic. So I grew up not knowing that, kind of like what your experience was, and so it is a family trait. Not that and like you also, I grew up with parents, very Christian parents. We went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, active in the choir, all this stuff. And I didn't see alcohol. We weren't around the alcohol, kind of similar to what you were. And it probably wasn't until I was in my 20s or 30s that I saw my parents drink, like during dinner or something. So, definitely not around it. And so comes the question that people always wonder, well, why are you an alcoholic? If you didn't grow up with it, if you weren't alive when your family was an alcoholic,
right.
Well, why are you one? Why don't you just quit?
And I guess that's part of the misconception is that a lot of people think that it is strictly behavioral, that it's a behavioral issue. And I don't know about for you, but I've had to explore this with my own children. And how do I want to introduce alcohol to them? Because I drank quite a bit while they were growing up, while my oldest ones were growing up. I have a 19-year-old, 17-year-old, 16-year-old, and then a 7-year-old. And I was very much a social drinker and never saw any problem with it or whatever, didn't hide it from them or anything like that. Now, like I said, I think when I was growing up, I kind of have thought back now, and I think now that because it was not around me and there weren't any deep discussions about why, it was just, we knew that there could be a problem and this and that. I think that maybe that might have played into me going a little bit overboard later on with not knowing how to gauge it, because I didn't have anything to gauge it by. I'd never, not that I really wanted to be around a bunch of drunk people, but I didn't have anything to kind of gauge it by. So then I went into this thought process of, well, I think I've overexposed my kids personally. I'm just going to be honest. I think my kids have been overexposed to it. There was too much partying going on when my older ones were younger. And so I'm thankful that I've learned from that now. But I guess that's, as a parent, that's something now that I wonder, like, how much do I want them to know ahead of time so they're not shell shocked? I don't want them going to college and going, okay, well, I never drank, and then, running at it because they think that it's cool, because everybody's doing it.
Right. Yeah. Kind of like you and I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Off camera, drinking alcohol is a socially accepted pastime. I hate to say the word pastime, but it really is. It's legal, and it's, socially accepted. I mean, when you think about it and just put it in simple terms, we always waited for the weekend, right? The weekend. What are we going to do this weekend?
Yep. And,
that always meant going somewhere, drinking, doing whatever. So you bring a great point about, because I have 2 older girls also from my previous marriage. And, unfortunately, they grew up with a father for the first 7 or 8 years, that drank every single night, and now, never abusive, never loud, never anything. That was one of my excuses to my wife at the time. Hey, I'm a happy drunk.
Right.
I'm not bothering you. I'm a happy drunk. I love y'all and I take care of y'all. I've worked hard. I've worked 12 hours. All I want to do is just me time. So there wasn't any issue in it. And to me,
or so it appeared. Right.
Right. Exactly. And then I look back, knowing what I know now, and spouses just get tired of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're a man or if you're a woman. If you're a spouse, you can just go so long, and you can try to point out the issues. But I have found out now. God blessed me with my wife now, who is 100% supporter of mine, 100% backs me up. But, this is the first time in my life that I've been 100% honest with not just me, but with my family and my kids and everything else.
Let me pause you right there. That's actually a good place to stop. And we're going to go ahead and take a break. And I want to come back and get right into that. And I'm going to touch on the other side to it of the woman's side. Okay. So we'll come right back in a minute. So everybody stay tuned and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Hello, I'm Audra and I'm the host of Coming in Hot on Astronet Radio. And I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you're enjoying the show. I also wanted to invite you to like and follow Coming in Hot on Instagram and Facebook, and you can also tweet me at the Audra Carroll. Now, I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode of Coming in Hot. Hey everybody, welcome back to Coming in Hot with Audra Carroll, and I'm talking to Mr. Mike Moulton. We're discussing addiction, and when we left out, we were discussing how it had affected his first marriages and his current marriage now, what the difference is. And the last thing that you said that just really got my light bulb going was when you said this is the first time that you feel like you've really truly been honest. And that just really, really hit home for me big time. So I just wanted to start out and let you finish your thought about that, about how different that is now.
Well, one thing is 100% true. Addicts are the best manipulators on the planet. I mean, it's just true. I can manipulate anybody at any given time, and it's actually sad. But being an addict usually starts in hiding. You don't really realize that you're abusing alcohol, that you're abusing drugs. Hey, I just smoke pot on the weekends, or I can smoke pot and then not do anything else, and pot's a plant. There's all kinds of excuses for every drug, for everything. And most people are social drinkers, or they're social users, or for whatever reason, it leads to more behind doors use, and then you're just in hiding. So you start to learn how to manipulate others knowing that you're using or that you're drinking. there's a word that's used a lot. It's called self-medicating.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people use that as a crutch. So, great manipulation is part of an addict's life, and until you become honest with yourself first, and say, hey, I'm not only manipulating my wife and my kids, or my mom and dad, aunts and uncles, friends, Facebook world, or whatever, you've got to be honest with you and be honest with everybody else out there. And until you do that, you can't take this road to recovery, because recovery is a hard fight. I mean, it really is.
I'm just going to say right now, just the experience that I have, and I have never been through treatment, but I definitely have abused alcohol, and it's a bitch. I'm just going to say straight up. It's not easy. It's just not. It's a monster.
And that's one of my goals, and I know that's one of your goals too, and we're going to come together and we'll have other shows, I know, but we haven't even touched the iceberg yet on what needs to happen, how hard the road to recovery is. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen with us. It happens with, friends and families, states, countries, there's just so much involved. And, since I did go to treatment, I did make that step, 25 years later, but hey, 25 years is, better than, 50 years.
Well, there was something that you had to learn during that time, in my opinion, and now you're able to go out and you're going to be able to share these experiences with people and go, okay, now look, I was that hard head right there. Because that's what I keep telling everybody about myself. I said, I was that hard head who I just didn't see it coming, And exactly what you said. Now, for me, when you talk about the hiding, that the manipulation, for me, I feel like my drinking is driven by anxiety. For the most part, mine is anxiety. I think that I went for many years drinking socially and it was fine. And then at some point, something triggered me to use it more as a coping mechanism for anxiety. And before I knew it, then, like you said, I'm still holding down a job. I'm still getting up every morning like I'm supposed to, and everything appears to be fine, but it's not. And I was finding myself sneaking here and sneaking there. And I'm like, okay, well, this isn't right. If I can't be honest with my husband about wanting to go have a drink, then there's something wrong. And the thing is it wasn't even necessarily that he was looking at me sideways, because half the time he may not have even known.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But in my mind, something inside me told me this is not right. If you are questioning yourself, then there's something wrong. But it was like I said, I never went to formal treatment. I don't know the steps. I have learned since then through a lot of research. And, we talked about Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he was in my last video. And in fact, I talked about habits and how habits actually, if you keep following down the rabbit hole, it leads to the definition. The definition of habits leads to the definition of addiction. And it's interesting because, like you said, any habit you have can be an addiction. But for some reason, there's only a stigma around people who have an addiction to drugs. And I don't think that even the addiction to alcohol is as bad as illicit drugs. I would even say pills. I even think that pills get off lighter. Personally, but they're all equally as bad. They're equally as detrimental. They're all poison.
They are. One thing that I've learned, and I'm glad that you brought the point up. I, for years, and probably yourself and a lot of your listeners and everything else, have probably thought, hey, I like to drink. He puts a needle in his arm. He's worse than I am.
Yes.
Which could not be further from the truth. Hey, drugs a drug.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, alcohol kills 20 to 25,000 more people a year than all drugs put together.
Wow.
It's and again, touching on the point that it is socially acceptable, it is legal, it's in every gas station, on every corner. Some places are open up on Sundays now, so that's a really good point that you bring up, and that's part of the manipulation that we start with, but an alcoholic, and I know because I am one, I'm in recovery, but I'll always be an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. I'll be a recovering alcoholic, but I'm always one. We're not any better than somebody who uses meth or crack cocaine or heroin,
Right. Just because you can go pick it up at the corner store. Right. By showing your ID. Exactly. Go ahead. Keep going. Sorry. I just had to throw that in there.
No, I mean, if you look at a user's brain, they have brain scans, and, they have a cocaine user and alcoholics, and they have 14 years, and I've actually seen this into treatment, and we're there, and they had a 14-year cocaine user and a 14-year alcoholic, and they did brain waves, and they showed the brains. They were completely the same. They destroyed the brain exactly the same. Now, appearance-wise, you could look different, mm-hmm. but, to your thinking, your brain, and everything else, there's no better drug to do. So awareness is really where we're at. And I do want to touch on one thing that you said, and I think it's very important. Okay. And stop me if we run out of time. We can talk about it later. But you brought up a point of you feel you were anxious. And so that led to drinking and everything. It's funny that you mentioned that. I talked to a dear friend of mine yesterday, and I was telling her, I hadn't seen her in quite a while, and I was telling her, hey, I'm getting my bachelor's in psychology, and I'm going to open up a counseling, and I'm here to fight for the stigma and blah, 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 and because she's in counseling for marriage and, something else. Very successful woman. And but because I opened up to her about what that I was an alcoholic, that she never knew, and I started telling my story. Well, she opened up and started telling me things that I didn't know about her, and she had told me that she has anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. She's just like, she feels for 20 something years, she's felt like she's going to bust out of her skin. And that it wasn't till like 3 years ago, she got medicine for it. And she went all these years, and she said, I had to fight people, my mom and my dad, telling me, hey, you need to go for a walk, get a hold of yourself. You need to calm down, and she said what I was telling her, they're ignorant. They're not stupid. They're ignorant because they just don't know. And she goes, so now I tell these women that are around me and everything, hey, it's not a weakness, because we got to talk. It's not a sign of weakness. And that's why I think, don't quote me on this, but I think only 8% of alcoholics seek treatment. And that's a scary number, because which goes back to the stigma that we were talking about. If we talk about our depression or our anxiety, panic disorders is rising like crazy. Mm-hmm. Our alcoholism, what do people think? They look down, or we think we're going to be looked down on. We're less than they are, so we bottle it up. When we bottle stuff up, and anxiety gets worse. Well, she was telling me, my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family were raging alcoholics. And me growing up there, and she goes, but now I think I understand. They had anxiety issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they drank to cope with their anxiety issues. And I immediately said, self-medicating. Absolutely. That's what people do, because instead of me wanting to go out, let's say I have anxiety issues, instead of me wanting to go out and seek counseling, because let's just face it, if your friends know that you're going to see a counselor, What are your friends going to think about you? Oh, that person's crazy. So we don't do it. So
that's a sad thing too.
It's true
that the stigma on therapy is such that it is. Okay. All right. I know he's like, you got 1 minute. So, okay, we're going to come back and jump right back into this because I'm all into it. So stick around. We'll be right back again. Hey, I'm Audra, and in between episodes of Coming in Hot with me, check out some of the other podcasts and shows that we have available, like The Brew with the amazing Fickle Witch. We have Thornication with the ever prickly but lovable Thorn. And then we have View from the Carnival with my man Robin, and he has taken on mental health. So check out these shows and many more that we have at astronetradio.com. And don't forget to subscribe to your favorite show so you don't miss any episodes. Hey everybody, welcome back to Coming in Hot. And I've been talking with Mr. Mike Moulton. If you're just tuning in, you need to go back and catch the first part because we have been talking about some really in-depth information about addiction and the stigma behind it and how it's perceived out in society and things like that. And so we left off the last segment talking about, like I said, the stigma of even just the word addiction and how there are different levels of addiction, it seems like, in society and things like that, and therapy, and how therapy is so important when you're dealing with trying to recover from addiction and stay in recovery. And I know that you have been in recovery before. And so can you tell me what your experience was with that?
Yeah, just to recap real quick, 20-something years, I was an alcoholic. Didn't realize I was until probably the last 2 years of my life. And the marriages that had gone south, bad relationships, at the time wasn't my fault, but, married to a woman that God blessed me with, and just the story on that sometime is for us to talk about, because I was actually drunk on an Easter Sunday after church and Facebook message a long lost friend, and we'll get into that later.
But, it sounds juicy. I'm going to be here for it.
Yeah, it's great. So finally, I've held my job for 16 years, going on 16 years, and I would consider myself very successful. Love my job. Would do anything for my job, and I've always been the person that's put my priorities: God, family, work. Always have been. Little did I know that my addiction was allowing me to say those priorities to everybody, but in all reality, Fred, which is my addiction's name. So when I refer to in the future Fred, that's my addiction, because you are somebody completely different when you are using or whatever. I
want to concur that 100%. I totally agree with that. And sometimes people can't separate that. It's really, really hard. And I was a person that was very judgy about that. And I could not separate it for many years myself, looking at other people and understand that it really wasn't them. In their right mind, they would not be doing this. They wouldn't act that way. They wouldn't say those things. Yep.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people don't realize that. And one thing in therapy, in treatment that I did learn, one of the biggest things, and we're talking about it now, was you need to name your addiction, because that's a release for you. Because first thing you have to understand, and the first thing you have to do to get on the road to recovery is forgive you. You have to forgive yourself first. You can let all the people around you tell you, that you're the greatest thing in the world because you're trying to get clean. Hey, you're doing the right thing. God's going to bless you because you finally realize it. But if you don't forgive you first, then you have nothing that you can get over. And so I learned you got to name your addiction or your illness. Mental illnesses is stuff we'll talk about later. But, for me, Fred is my addiction. And you're right. I'm really glad you brought that up, because when I would do things when I was drunk, that's not me. When I would say things, when I would argue with my wife or with friends or family or whatever, that's not me. That's Fred. And so into treatment, I learned that. But the biggest thing that I did learn is, we carry a lot of guilt. Just humans in particular, we carry guilt. It's just in our nature. Because we do a lot of bad things, we really do. But when you're an addict or you have anxiety, depression, and all that, you manifest that guilt and you carry it with you. And until you can forgive yourself, you can't make that next step. So that's something that I really did learn. That's something that I did. And that's why counseling is great, that everybody can benefit in some form or fashion from counseling.
Yeah, because therapy is a huge part of the recovery program, right? I mean, I have some knowledge of it secondhand, and I used to have an Al-Anon book and things like that, but what I remember and what I know about therapy is a huge part of it. And a little bit of my history, before I'd come to terms and realize that I'd had a drinking problem and this and that, I had to go through a 6-week intensive therapy program, and it was set forth to me by a physician that I was seeing at the time. Due to I was so overwhelmed, I basically just had a breakdown. That's just what the truth of it was. And we talked about anxiety being a driving factor. It's something that you said also made me think too. Anxiety was a factor, but I also realized too that the guilt came before the anxiety. I think that it's funny. We're in therapy right now. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, because when I feel like things really, really got out of control, probably around the time when things probably really got askew, I had a failed marriage. Yep. I've lost my dad. I've lost my brother. I'm not where I'm thinking I'm supposed to be at. And I don't think that my conscious mind could wrap around that whole picture that, okay, things are not the way they're supposed to be and it's okay. And so I think that I started medicating also out of guilt, because I was not where I was supposed to be. And it made me feel better to not have to feel like I wasn't the person I wanted to be or where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's what we do. We don't like guilt. Mm-hmm. Guilt is a natural occurrence to us, but we also, on the other hand, we don't like guilt. So instead of going out and confessing our guilt to everybody, which would be crazy because you don't want to tell everybody around you what you're guilty of, we want to numb it, because we don't like that feeling, and to numb it would be to take an altering substance of whatever kind. Here's the difference. Do you know how much I would love to go out to a restaurant with my family or friends or whatever and have a drink and be able to have that one drink and put it back down and finish dinner and be satisfied and go home? That's the difference between a non-alcoholic and an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. I can't do that. I want to. I know that that's what normal people do. They go out and have a glass of wine, maybe a couple of beers, and they eat, and then they go home and it's done. But I can't control that because of chemical imbalances, just everything that goes on. So people need to understand that it's not a choice. And, we've talked on it prior to that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of guilt that comes along with that. You bring up failed marriages. I've had 2 of them. You know, I get it. You know, the divorce rate in this country is higher than it's ever been, you know, and it's gotten so bad that people are choosing not even to get married. They're just moving in with each other. Well, you know, that brings a lot of guilt on too, because a lot of people understand that that's not how it's supposed to be, even though it's socially acceptable. So you know, you're bringing guilt on everything we do. We can talk about how that would bring guilt on.
Oh yeah. And sorry.
Please.
Well, no, I was going to say, I've had this conversation recently with my husband and my kids and a few other people about there's other social guilts that I think have been ingrained in us and in our parents that were passed down. And a lot of it is, let's see if I can remember the phrase. It's the, what is it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but there's always good intentions behind it. But I think some of the things that also lead a lot of people to need something to help them get by or to think that they need something is because of some of these social norms that have been passed down. Like if the house is not clean at the end of the day and the wife has been at home all day, and it doesn't have to be that the husband puts it on her. We as women will do that to ourselves. We will go, I didn't get all this done and he's been out there doing this and I just feel terrible. You know,
and ask yourself, where does that feeling come from? And I think you've already hit it. You know, your mother, people's mothers were probably like that, and because their mothers were like that, you know, as time changes. And you're right, that's a great point. It's not that you want to feel that. You don't want to feel that way. But you do because of your environment and the way that you were raised.
Yeah, and it's a lie to ourselves is what I've noticed. So many of these things that these standards that, and we can blame, this is another thing, and I know we're going to run out of time in a minute, but this is another thing. Don't lose your train of thought. I did lose my train of thought. Dang it. Crap. I knew I was going to do that.
Information overload.
Oh, I know exactly. Let's see if I can remember. These socially acceptable norms, like the house being cleaned or the husband being the one that goes out and this and that. And when we don't live up to those standards, we will just guilt ourselves. Nobody else even has to tell us to do it. And most of them are lies. That's where I was going with it. Most of them are lies. It's just something that worked for someone in their home. And for some reason, everybody's adopted it. And now if you're not falling into that category, then where are you at? You're not doing your job as a human being or a wife or a husband, you know. And really, it's no matter what's going on in your house or what's going on in my house and how it's being run, as long as it's being run.
Yeah. You know, you're right. The subconscious thoughts and behaviors that we have that we don't even think about is absolutely crazy. That to just think that they can control our lives. And people are probably saying, whoa, Mike, you know, they don't control your lives and stuff. But of course they do. You just made a great point that subconsciously you feel that if the end of the day you've been home all day and the dishes aren't clean or the house isn't completely clean, you feel guilty. Well, that's not a thought that you brought yourself on. You didn't consciously want to think that way. And you subconsciously think of it, which that's a whole nother topic. And so, you know, just to make a long story short, and we'll have more shows, I'm sure, about it. But, you know, somebody that's an addict that self-medicates and then becomes an addict, you know, whether guilt's involved in it or guilt's not involved in it, you know, I want people out there to know that those people just need to be told, you know, you're someone. You know, it doesn't matter. You're someone to somebody. Yes. You know, you mean something. You know, you are loved. You know, because you know, I'm loved. You know,
absolutely.
My wife obviously loves me enough that she stood behind me when I was going through treatment, being an alcoholic, doing all that. You know, but I would have never gotten to that point if I hadn't forgave myself first. And, you know, that's what we have to do. And we were kind of talking about that.
Yeah. You know, and part of, I think a lot of people being able to get to the point of being able to recover. I know a lot of people have to hit a rock bottom, and that's true. That was for me too. There was a rock bottom for me. And everybody has their own rock bottom. But at the same time, when you reach that rock bottom, you need somebody there that has grace. Somebody that will lend you grace, because everybody needs grace. Nobody is perfect, and everybody has their own demons, I'm tearing up, demons and skeletons in the closet and everything. And being able to offer someone grace when they are in the throes of addiction and need help is the best lifeline you could give anybody. And, I'm going to have to close this show out. We have so much more to talk about, and we can get into the two brains next time, the subconscious and the conscious, because that is a key element to being able to recover from addiction and to stay in recovery. And so I'm excited to get into all that and the psychology behind it. And I promise I'll try not to cry, but, but, you know, it'll be what it'll be. But anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming on and opening up and being so raw about, what all has happened in your life and how addiction has affected you. And I absolutely look forward to the next show and having you back to continue this discussion.
Well, thank you for having me. And I look forward to it also.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, you go enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope everybody else enjoys the rest of theirs. And I will see you next week on Coming in Hot.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.